Today was a very obvious day on what to do. I had mentioned in my last vlog that I wanted to photograph the Volta Temple in the park, and it seemed like the perfect day to go ahead and do that. So I made my way through the city in the dark to the park. I had two goals in mind. One was to photograph it at night, illuminated by the street lights and the lighting that they put on the temple itself, and to photograph it in natural light after the street lights have all been turned off. It was fairly simple, so as soon as I arrived, I started looking for compositions on how I wanted to frame my subject of the temple, and I got straight down to doing some photography. Okay, my first composition this morning is going to be one further back and zoomed in. I'm going to show you the difference between using a wide angle and zooming in. So this first shot is a bit wider, and it's going to have to be an exposure blend as well. So I really have no idea how this is going to turn out, because I'm going to have to blend at least 2 exposures, and that's because the foreground is illuminated, but it's not very bright, whereas the actual main subject, the temple, is really bright and it's blowing out really easily. So if I expose for the temple, then I'm not getting anything else in the frame. But if I expose for the foreground, then the temple is horribly blown out. So I'm going to have to blend those 2 exposures where the foreground is being exposed and the subject is being exposed at different shutter speeds. So for the foreground, there's a grass lawn that leads up to the temple, and there's some lights over it. So they're being illuminated by the street lights, this grass in the foreground. But as I say, it's not as bright as the actual lights on the temple, because the temple is white, so it's reflecting a lot of that light. So to get an exposure for the foreground, it has to be a good 30 seconds at f9. And that way I can get a nice bright foreground and really nice bright vibrant green in the foreground. But for the temple, that's a whole different story. I've got to actually create an exposure that prevents any blowout in the white marble. And that means it's an exposure of about 4 seconds, maybe even less. And that's like, I don't know how many stops that is. That's like 5 stops of difference. I'm going to do an exposure for the temple now. Let's get my histogram. Just checking my histogram to make sure that there are no blown highlights. And I might take an intermediary one and use 3 exposures to get some more definition to the temple itself as well. It's quite windy today, that's why I've chosen to use this camera instead of my little pocket. So I know that I've just exposed for the temple, but I know there's going to be some blown highlights. And that way I've got 3 exposures to mess around with on the computer in Photoshop and try and create a blended exposure that can best convey what I am seeing, because it's completely different what you can see with your eye as what the camera can see. And that's just to do with how the camera interprets the data of the light. I'm going to shut up now, work on this a bit more, and I hope you enjoy the resulting image. And then I'm going to move a bit closer and do a wide angle shot, and we can compare those as well. So check this one out. I hope it's worked out with the exposure blend, and I'll get back to you in a moment. So I'm having to move quickly on this one because the light is coming up much quicker than I thought, and I'm in quite a conspicuous place right in front of the temple. I'm shooting wide at 24mm, and I'm going to do the same thing again, 3 exposures to blend, but just because of the lighting is so different between the white marble and the other elements in the composition. So I'm going to have to really work on my Photoshop game on these images. This one's really interesting. I've gotten a lot closer and I've sort of framed it so it's being flanked by the trees that surround it. When I expose at 30 seconds, you can see the trees really well. There's a nice blue sky with streaking and stuff like that. It looks really good. And I hope that when I come to process it, I can get all the definition that I need. And once again, I'm having to stop down by quite a lot to expose for the highlights of the white marble. And I'm going to do an intermediary one to try and get as much definition in the temple as possible. I think it should work out really well if I can do it well in Photoshop. And before the lights go off, I would like to get another composition if I can, but we'll just have to see how that goes. So again, I'm in a very conspicuous place right in the middle of the park, on the path. And I've gone at an angle to it this time because I really like these. They've got these very well sculpted trees surrounding the temple. And I really like this one on the right of the image. Again, I'm going to have to do exposure blending for this. There's no other way to capture everything that my eye is seeing. So 3 exposures, 1 for the darker areas, 1 for the highlights, and 1 for the in-between is what I'm going to have to go with here. I'll try and talk more about that when I get home, when I've done the processing, and I can tell you how I approached it a bit more back in the office, which I will cut to after this image. But yeah, I quite like this composition. I've got the temple as the main subject, as always. I've got a tree on the right, and actually also sort of just off center is another light that's illuminating the tree. I think it's quite an interesting composition, although I'm not sure which one is my favorite yet. Now, I was rushing a bit there because the sun is starting to rise. You can see it sort of over there behind the city. And I am planning on photographing this in and around sunrise. So I'm going to be, I'm going to keep working this scene, looking for other compositions. But I would like to stay here and take a second one after the sun has risen and the lights have gone off, and see how they compare. I don't think there's going to be any colours in the sky though. So yeah, I'm going to stand up, stretch my legs, and just wait for this sunrise to happen and the lights to turn off, and we'll see what the difference is in the end. In the meantime, I hope you enjoy this image, and afterwards I'm going to talk about how I edited those 3 images of the illuminated temple. So those 3 images taken at night with the various lighting on the temple were actually really very technically difficult to process. And that's because, as I mentioned, I would need to do exposure blending, which is a great method. It's sort of like very direct and focused HDR. So HDR, high dynamic range photography, and typically that involves bracketing your your exposures, one dark, one middle, one light, and then you use those in with an automatic program, and it takes the lighter parts that are well exposed and the darker parts that are well exposed, and it blends it into one composition. Now this exposure blending is more direct. Instead of doing it for the whole image, it's doing it for specific parts of the image. And so I thought I'd best explain a little bit about that and how I approached the processing of those three images. As I mentioned in the field, I knew that I was going to have to approach this as an exposure blend because the temple is white and it had very bright lights on it, but obviously I wanted some of the other elements of the composition to be illuminated and visible as well, and that was absolutely impossible to do. What my eye could see was not at all what the camera could see, because the camera has a certain way of interpreting the data of the light that the sensor can pick up, and our eyes are just much better at that than any technology out there yet. I've imported the images into Lightroom. I'm going to select the three images of one subject. So I'm going to do this one here, the very bright temple, and you can see in this image that the surrounding elements of the temple are very well exposed, but the temple itself is gone. It's completely burnt out. If you look at the histogram, it's right up on the right hand side and there's no data to be recovered there. I'm going to take that one. This one is the dark image where you can see the details of the really illuminated parts inside the temple. I'm going to take those three images of that one composition, right click, edit in, open as layers in Photoshop, and then it's going to open those stacked on top of each other in one file in Photoshop. Okay, so we're now in Photoshop. It took a moment to load. So this, as I said, this is just a quick explanation of the process. I'm not going to do an in-depth edit, and I'm not going to teach you how to do this. This is a method that I am still learning, so I'm not perfect at it, I must admit. But it was a good practice. So this exposure, the one that has the most correctly exposed, is the exposure that I want to be at the bottom of my images. So I'm going to move that down here to the bottom layer. You can't see it now, but if I turn off these ones, you can see it quite easily. Now these other layers, this one, the intermediary layer, and this one, the layer that really exposes well the highlights over here, these layers I'm going to apply a mask, and I'll show you how. All I'm going to do is click Option on a Mac, I'm not sure about the PC controls, Option, and then this mask icon down here, and that's it. So that layer is now hidden because I have an inverted mask. I'm going to do the same with the top layer. So all three, so the top two layers have a mask applied, and it means that now I can paint onto them and show which areas of the image that I want visible. From this one, we obviously want this temple to come from this middle layer here. So I've got my quick selection tool. This is just a really rough guide. I'm going to select all this area like that. Go to the mask over here. Click that. Go to my brush tool. Make sure I'm on white. I'm going to increase the opacity to good 80%, I think. And normal mode, and my brush size is a little big, I think. I can't see my brush for some reason. There we go. So I'm now going to brush that quick selection area, and you'll see the magic happen as the temple appears. See that? If I really want to, I could use the fill tool as well. But this is a nice, easy way. Just brushing it in like so. And there you go. So you can see that it's taken the temple part of this image and put it over this one. So if I click it on and off, before, after. And we can take that a step further even. Go to this image, this layer. I'm going to select this very bright area here, very minute area. Go up to this mask layer on the top layer. That is the darkest exposure. Go back to my brush tool, brush it in, and now I've got all that detail in that area. And that's sort of how I approach exposure blending. It takes a lot more refinement than that, I must admit, but that sort of gives you an idea of how it happens. As you can see, I would then go through this image over and over, choosing all the areas that I want to be darker or from one of the other exposures and paint them in very gently. And I can vary the opacity and the flow to get different effects and to vary the amount. But if I zoom in on this area, you can see how much of a difference. If you look at this area where it's very bright, even on this middle exposure, it's overexposed, this area. And then by using this darker layer, I can get that definition back in the temple. Now this is obviously wrong, but well. So that's a very quick rough guide on how to do exposure blending. As I say, I just wanted to explain how I got the images that I wanted, and I think I've talked enough about this. So all three of the night images, I had to do this method of exposure blending. It's a little bit of a cheat, but you know, those images are there, the data is there, it's just the camera couldn't interpret all of what I could see. So I was just making it a bit easier.
Right. The lamps have finally turned off, and I was actually treated to my first colourful sunrise here in Como, so I'm really happy about that. I was actually having to move very fast, so I wasn't able to do any recording actually. It was so quick. And some clouds blew over the temple, and I've got them just above the temple, and it looks amazing. So there was some really light pinks. I started to see it develop over the city, and I was like, oh, it's not going to come behind the temple. I really didn't think it was going to come behind the temple, so I went and took a quick shot of the cathedral, just because I thought it might look good as a silhouette. And then I came around and saw that actually it started to light up the sky all behind the mountains around me, and it just started to get this lovely pink glow in the background. So I quickly went and reset up some of the shot at an angle, and then the best ones are definitely here front on of the temple behind me, because just above it was this like snaking cloud that looked amazing. So I didn't have any time to record about composition, about exposures, or anything like that, because I was just reacting to the colour and I didn't want to miss it. But it's still going on now, except for the fact that there's no clouds above the temple. Just looking at the colour behind me, it's amazing. I started to see a little bit of a glow on the mountains, and it just, I was just like, I wish I was up there, you know. But this looks like they're going to be some really good images. I'm really looking forward to editing them. I'm going to have a little wander around, probably no more photography today, and head back home to edit these pictures. I'm really excited about editing these pictures.
As I mentioned in the field, I didn't really have the time to talk about the compositions I was going for. I was trying to move really quickly because I wasn't sure how long the sunrise colours were going to last, and I was really very surprised that I had any sunrise colours at all. I used the photographer's ephemeris to try and get an idea of when there's a nice sunrise, and it said there wasn't going to be one, so I was really surprised, and it was a really nice surprise, I must admit. So the first image that I managed to get of the sunrise, I was was taking a quick picture of the cathedral because you can see it across the lake, and it had some colour behind it, and it looked really like a nice silhouette, but the images were crap, so we're not going to look at those. But then when I saw that this colour was starting behind me, back up behind the temple, which is what I was really wanting for, I rushed back to where I was, and I got the temple at an angle image, and I just quickly recomposed and got an image off. And it was the last one with the lamp still lit as well, because immediately after I took that image, the lights went off. I didn't need to do any exposure blending with these sunrise images either. I was able to bring out the shadows and the highlights in Lightroom like I normally would. So that was good. It certainly reduced the edit time on the images. So once I got that image of the angle, I rushed back to be facing the temple, and I took two images, and you can sort of see the relationship between a wide angle lens in these images as well. I ended up shooting both in a portrait orientation because the clouds were up above the temple and I wanted to include them in the composition. They were why I was taking the image. So I got on the grass where I took one of the images from before, from the night view, and I switched to portrait orientation on my camera, and I set it up, and I got an image off, and it looked really good. I really like that, but I prefer this one to the next one actually, because there's a little bit less distortion in the temple. There's a bit more face on, and there's a bit more compression because of the varying focal length. The next image, I got closer to the temple and I was on the cobblestones in front of it, and I sort of had to tilt the camera up a little bit, and so there's a bit of like perspective distortion going through the temple, so it's sort of like it starts off wide and narrows a bit towards the top, and I like it, but it's not the best, I don't think. I think the image before was better. Overall, I was really surprised with the colour. I was really happy with how the images turned out, and I think it was a great morning, and one that has been my best morning here in Como yet. Check out these images, and I hope you enjoy them. So that's it for this week's vlog. I had a great time, as I mentioned. It's been one of the best mornings I've had here in Como. I really enjoyed the images. I've managed to practice a new skill in Photoshop, which I haven't done before. It's something that I'm going to work on a bit more in the future as well. And overall, I had an amazing morning, and I'm really looking forward to the next one. To be honest, I haven't got that much planned for the next vlog. I'm not sure what I'm going to do, but that's the way I like to do things, as you may have realised. Go out and see what inspires me. I hope you have been having a good time out and about yourselves. I know that things are a little bit difficult at the moment, but photography can be a great creative outlet and can help us get outside of our minds. So I hope you are having some fun yourselves and taking the opportunities that you do have to do some photography. If you liked today's video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and if you would like to see what's coming up, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. It's really greatly appreciated as I continue to grow and build this channel, and I hope that I can continue to inspire you to go out and get some images as well. Thanks for watching. and I'll see you on the next one.